Christopher Paolini. He's an author, if you don't know him, and he just put out a book called To Sleep in a Sea of Stars. If you're not familiar with the name, Christopher Paolini is the writer of the Eragon series, also known as The Inheritance Cycle, but I don't know, everyone kind of just knows Eragon. And he just put out a new book. I've already shot a main video essay piece for this channel, for this book, but I just figured I would talk a little bit more about it off the cuff because I have a lot of thoughts about Christopher Paolini in general. And he's a bit of a controversial author, not controversial, but like people have a lot of opinions about him. He's not done anything wrong. Like he's not like a hated author, but people have a lot of different thoughts and conflicting opinions. There's a lot of disagreement about his work out there. So I figured I would shoot my opinion and some thoughts about him into the void, if you feel me. So yeah, To Sleep in a Sea of Stars came out like September 15th, 14th. Not very long ago. And I have it right here. This is a monster book. It is gorgeous. It looks beautiful, but it is very thick. It's like 900 pages. And his books usually have kind of big type. This isn't that big. So they do take up a lot of pages. But yeah, this is his first release since completing the Eragon series or Inheritance Cycle. I don't really know what it's best to call it that, but I'll just run with whatever I feel like. Because like I said, we're willy-nilly, whatever. It's the first thing that he's released since completing that series in, God, it must have been like 2013, 2014. It's been forever since he finished that series. And he did release one book of short stories that were set in the Eragon universe, but I don't really count that as like a full novel because I read it and it was pretty decent, but it wasn't really a big release, wasn't really the kind of place where you discover an author it's not something I would consider to be like a big piece of work. It wasn't necessary for you to read unless you're just kind of a big fan of him. I read it. It was solid. It was just kind of short fiction. If you're interested in the universe, it was worth reading. It was called The Fork, the Witch, and the Worm. And I think it came out maybe 2 years ago. Yeah, it might have been 2 years ago. But yeah, nothing really substantial. It was all right. It was worth reading if you enjoy Eragon, but nothing substantial. So I don't count that. So I call To Sleep in a Sea of Stars the first release since finishing up the Eragon series. And the Eragon series is an interesting topic because I read these books before I was really into writing and really into reading a lot in general. So my opinion is a bit conflicted about it, and it's a little bit less of an analytical opinion, but I still stand by it because I'll just start from the beginning. Christopher Paolini is an author that my father found when I was a young boy, and God, I must have been like between 8 and 12, whenever Eragon first came out. Eragon came out, and I used to read I used to listen to Audible narrated stories in bed at night before I would go to sleep. And me and my dad would read the same books at the same time. Well, listen to them via Audible and kind of discuss them. So we would kind of look for books that we could both enjoy. And my dad found Eragon because it was getting some pretty good reviews, and it was a bigger book at the time. I tried it out, ended up loving it as a child. Like I said, a little younger, not an exactly analytical opinion at this point, but I loved that book. The second book came out, Eldest, second book in the series, and I read that one too. We read that one together. I don't think we finished it though. Yeah, I don't think I ever finished it. It was a little bit of a slower book, but I kind of just moved on with life. I wasn't super good. It was back then. The internet wasn't what it is now. I wasn't super good at keeping up with that kind of stuff in media and books. And it was just something my dad had turned me on to. And I loved it, but I never moved on with it past Eldest. So that was my original experience of the book. So I was a little younger, but I loved it. Thing is, a few years back, still before I started really writing or even thinking about story in a deeper way, anything analytical, but I ended up returning to the series because I remembered how much I liked it when I was a kid. And I re-listened to Eragon and Eldest on Audible, maybe 3 or 4 years ago. I was listening to it at work. I was in kind of a weird spot mentally and in my life, kind of in a little bit of a rut. Some stuff had been going on in my life. And so I jumped back into it to kind of get back into something that I enjoyed as a kid, and kind of did it for the nostalgia factor. And I ended up really getting back into the series and really liking it. Then realizing that the series had been completed, I finished Eragon, Eldest, and I moved right on into the third book and the fourth book. I think it's only 4 books. But I genuinely, I can say at the time, I don't know what my opinion would be on it if I read it back now, because I don't remember everything about it, but I really enjoyed that series. And I see a lot of people on BookTube or YouTube in general talking about books and entertainment, and they kind of dunk on Eragon, or they defend Eragon. But what I don't often see as much is people talk about the series as a whole. They kind of just talk about Eragon the book, because the main criticism of Eragon was that it was not original. But that was a criticism, in my opinion, more of Eragon the first book, not the series. And I think that all those criticisms are pretty valid of the original book 1. It was very derivative. It was like ripped straight out of Star Wars, lots of very basic tropes. And if you listen to Christopher Paolini talk about the books and those criticisms, he's sort of addressed them, not in depth as far as I know, but he's addressed them, and he's pretty much said that was what he intended to do. And the thing that you have to consider here is, I haven't mentioned this yet, but if you're familiar with him, you may know that Eragon was written and released, I think it was released when he was 18 years old, but it was written when he was 16 years old. He was a bit of a prodigy, bit of a nerdy kid. I mean, just writing a book that he was really interested in as kind of a writing exercise, I believe, about dragons back when he was 16. Like, dude, no one is writing a book that good when you're 16, even if it was kind of unoriginal and derivative. It was just kind of fun for him, and it turned out to be something that a lot of people enjoyed. There's a lot of other details surrounding the release of that book that are really interesting to me, like how he self-published it, and Christopher Paolini himself was homeschooled. And for those of you that don't know, which none of you know because I've never talked about it on this channel, I too am homeschooled, and so it does kind of resonate with me, Paolini's story, and I guess like the culture that he may have been raised in, with academics and reading and writing and art, and being able to write your own book and self-publish a book when you're like 18 years old. I don't know. That's super awesome. And I respect that a lot. So basically I ended up, but I also continue to end up giving Eragon a bit of a pass. Not that like it's got a bunch of glaring problems that have to be like looked over. It's just a really enjoyable adventure novel. And you don't read too much into the tropes and the lack of original story arcs in the first book, because you kind of get involved in the world and the characters, which I think he did a good job of. And moving on to the other books, I felt like he moved away from those problems with Eragon and grew up a lot as he was finishing the series. And I don't think a lot of people often talk about how good the rest of the books were. Like I said, I have not returned to these books since becoming a little more analytically minded. So you can take my opinion with a grain of salt, but I really thought that especially the third and fourth books of that series really drove it home. And I recall being incredibly satisfied with the way that he ended the series, as well as like just hooked on the books as I went through them. You look at his author interviews and the ways that he's been talking about the book, he's mentioned that it went through some rough spots and he had to relearn how to write different stories, and he's getting into a genre and getting into a lot of technical details of the sci-fi genre involving like science and space travel and all that kind of stuff that really probably did take a long time to figure out and write. So the book is finally here. It is a sci-fi novel. It's kind of a space opera, kind of about like colonizing planets and aliens and all sorts of things like that. If you're interested in the book, you can check out all the pitches that he's got for it. I'm not going to pitch it to you, but I am going to say that I've been reading it and I'm enjoying it. I finished, like I said earlier, doing a piece for the channel, a video essay that's a lot more analytical, gets into some of the aspects of the opening of the book. It's an anatomy of the opening series, which I hope you guys will enjoy. But I'm enjoying the book so far. And I just think that Paolini is someone that like, I just kind of like supporting him. And I don't know if it's because like I feel like a kinship between like the fact that I was homeschooled and he was homeschooled as well. But I enjoy supporting him, and this book is entertaining so far. I think he's a good storyteller. I can't say that the books don't have problems. I can't say that he's the strongest writer I've ever seen, but I like supporting him, and I think this book is interesting. It's got some impressive science. He's done a lot of research and worked really hard to get some of the scientific elements of the technology in this sci-fi world that he's created. Or, well, it's set in our world, but it's like, I mean, he pretty much created the world. So yeah, there's a lot of new elements to it that clearly took a lot of work, and he's very proud of. I've been kind of following the press for this book as it's come out. He's done a lot of interviews, a book tour on YouTube and so forth. And I mean, I think it's impressive. I think it's worth checking out, and I'm enjoying it so far. It's one of those, reading is so hard. God, trying to read a lot of books. And when you get slammed with 900-page heifers like this, it is so hard to keep up with books. This book ended up coming out when I have the physical copy of the book, but I'm actually not reading the physical copy. I'm listening to it on Audible. I know that's like, it's like such a defilement of reading to some people. Some people like to trash on listening to books, but I have to read a lot of books, and honestly, it just helps if I can get through more books by both reading physical copies of books as well as listening on Audible. So judge all you want. But I bought this book. I pre-ordered it over a year ago, but I ended up getting it on Audible just a week ago when it came out, because I wanted to get into it and start doing some pieces on it and talking about the book. But I'm actually in the middle of another book, and I'm getting slammed with big books. I'm in the middle of a book that I'm loving, which I probably won't do any pieces on, but it's called, got it right here, called Taiko. It's by Eiji Yoshikawa. I hope I'm not butchering that name. I already did a piece, Book of the Week piece on Musashi by the same author. It's a samurai novel, and most of what this author did, he's an older author. I think this book was released in like 1920. But much of his work is about historical. They're historical novels about kind of feudal Japan and those kind of areas and transitional time periods. I'm not a history buff, so I'm not going to make myself look like an idiot trying to explain it all. But I really loved Musashi, and for some reason, I was just itching for something like that, kind of revisiting Musashi for the video that I did on it. And I ended up finding this book called Taiko, which is it's about Hideyoshi, a guy named Hideyoshi, and two other like samurai warlords, and how they kind of united Japan. I honestly haven't even gotten that far into like the historical accuracy of it. Obviously, there's probably some, but he tends to write about historical subjects, but a lot of the happenings in the books are very what would you say, fictionalized? Yeah. So, I'm really enjoying that book, but I don't know. I mean, it's a book that was released like serially in 1920, and I'm reading an English translation of it. So like, I feel like I don't really know if there's much to be done in terms of like creating content around the book. I may decide to do one or two pieces about it when I've completed it, but it is a 900-page monster, and the type is so small. Like, I just have to show you this. I mean, you know what it's like, but like, this is rough. It's hard. So yeah, I'm sure that you audio listeners will appreciate me doing all the video things like showing you books. But it's a great book. But all that to say, that is the reason that I am having to read To Sleep in a Sea of Stars, Paolini's new book, on Audible, because I was already in the middle of Taiko and I didn't feel like I could just drop it and start reading To Sleep in a Sea of Stars. So I did what any smart man would do, and I started listening to one on Audible while I continue to read Taiko in the physical copy, because I really enjoy the physical copy of that. And I'm not even sure that Taiko it's such an old book. I actually doubt it has. I don't think Musashi had an Audible version either, like a narrated audio. So yeah, so that's kind of what I'm rolling with in the book realm. I guess that's kind of like an update to you guys and a little bit of talk about pop culture within the book world right now, because hopefully, I haven't seen the numbers on Paolini's new book, but I hope it's doing well. It had to have done decently. It was released by Tor Books, and they're a great publishing company. I really like what they do and a lot of the books they put out. So I hope that it's doing well. And, if I can drive anyone towards checking out the book, go ahead and check it out. I think Paolini is an author worth supporting, and I'm enjoying it pretty decently.